Right, just starting to rebuild the outer gearbox casing. So the first thing I've done is there's a little needle roller bearing down in here, which is where the cross shaft goes for the gear change, and they're a bit of beggars to replace, and this one's fine. I've just greased it and oiled it and cleaned it, and it's fine. So that little roller bearing in there is fine. So the next thing I'm going to do is this is the old oil seal for the kickstart shaft, and so I'm going to put this new oil seal in. So there's a little it's sort of like halfway between an oil seal and an O-ring. This seal, it's actually more like the X-ring seals for the push rods. Anyway, it goes in there, and then hopefully, because it's on camera, of course it won't, but we'll then just tap this in, and hopefully it will just seat nicely. Yeah. And then I'm just checking that that's going through. There's a bit of oil on it. And just twist it through. There we go. Don't want to damage it now. I damage it on the cutaway for the cotter pin. There, that's nice. Okay, going to take that out now because that's going to be in our way. Good. Right, I'm getting ready to fit the gear selection mechanism to the inner gearbox. So what we've got is a number of springs. We've got these curved springs, excuse me, and these go either side of this arm to hold this gear quadrant in place, and it's this that acts, then that goes onto the linkage which goes across to the actual gear lever. Then we've got these plungers, and they fit in here with the springs underneath, and they operate underneath this plate, and they give some tension to the whole gear change. Now, from experience, it's always wise to change these springs and the plungers. The springs tend to get very tired, especially on a T160, because of the through shaft, the gear lever shaft, which adds a load of weight to the whole gear change, and so these springs get tired, and that makes the whole gear change sloppy. And then also these plungers, you know, they wear. I don't know if you can look at that. You know, that edge, yeah, that's not bad. But then here's the new ones, new springs and new plungers, and then if you compare that edge, you know, that's pin sharp. You know, whereas the other one a bit worn and you know, not too clever. So they don't cost that much. So I always advise changing the springs and the plungers in this mechanism in the outer casing. So that's what we're going to do now. Okay, let's. I think you can see everything. So I think the first thing we'll do is we'll put these new curved springs in. Just check that we are on camera, as it were. Bring this over a bit. There we go. They're nice and good new strong springs. And then we've got the plungers. I'll just add a little bit of oil to them. And then put the new springs in. Whoopsie, whoopsie. And then the plungers. I'm just checking that they're going up and down totally freely. Yeah, I think we're okay on that one. Yeah, that's better. Okay, and then the angled side face outwards. Now we've got the cover plate. Now if you see the cover plate, it's absolutely rusty, and I think the reason for that is that the gearbox, when I took this apart, was just full of grease, and because it was full of grease, it didn't actually, the grease sort of sat in the bottom of the gearbox and didn't actually lubricate parts like this. I think it's good enough. I could have replaced it, but it's just a bit of surface rust, and when we get the actual oil circulating in the gearbox properly, that'll all be fine. Doesn't matter about surface rust on this, and the actual edges I think are okay. Yeah, I think we're okay. So then that simply sits on top, and it compresses these plungers. Okay, get it down, there we go. And then the plungers, when this quadrant turns with the gear lever, the plungers are pushed underneath this plate. In either direction. There we go. Right, put the these nuts back on, and I'm going to put a little bit of thread lock because we don't want them coming undone. And there we are. Okay, now we can't move it by hand, but the springs are too strong now. But there we are, new springs, new plungers in this outer casing, and then the only last thing is to fit the kickstart quadrant. Okay, so last thing is kickstart quadrant, and I'll just gently feed that in through the new oil seal, hopefully. There we go. And then the spring hooks on there, and then when we put it in, we'll be tensioning the spring so that the kickstart returns properly. The only problem we've got is at the moment we haven't got a kickstart lever, but I'll find a way, I'll put some moulds or something on that we can tension it because we're trying to find a lever at the moment. Okay, and that's basically the outer cover. It's ready. We've got to do this sort of oops, so those you can't see that. We've got to do this sort of aperture, which contains the mechanism to transfer the gear change across the other side of the bike. All I've done is, I've just greased up and oiled the little bearing in there. Okay, getting ready to put the outer gearbox cover on. So I've done up the lock tabs. Check that the pull's working. I've checked the end float on the lay shaft magnet. So it's about 10 thou, which is what you want, and that's just perfect, about 10 thou. I checked it before we dismantled the gearbox, but we fitted new thrust washers, and it's always good just to check, and I'm very happy with that. I've checked that the gears are working. So this is the quadrant that when you move the gear lever, the teeth then move the quadrant round. So I can then check, I've checked the gears are working by just moving, there we go, into gear, probably second, then I can do another one third. Okay, you can just move it around fourth probably, and probably I'll see if I can do the last one into fifth, if I can. Don't worry too much if the gearbox feels a bit like this, or a bit at sea, because it's so difficult to check a gearbox on the bench. So don't worry. Yeah, I think we're down into fifth now, and you can check because when you turn the main shaft, the gearbox sprocket moves as well. Now what I'm going to do is, and this is quite important, is I'm going to put the gearbox into first gear. Into neutral, because when we have put the outer cover on, we need to put the neutral indicator switch in, and we need it to be in neutral to make sure we can set the switch correctly. And of course we haven't got the gear lever yet, so okay, I'm pretty sure we're up in first there. Just going to double check. Yeah. Okay, so then I'm just going to snick it down a bit if I can. There we go, into neutral. And I can check that because the gearbox sprocket, when I turn the main shaft, the gearbox sprocket isn't turning. So I know that's in neutral. So then when we come to fit the neutral indicator switch, we know that that lug on the cam plate, that little bit that sticks out, that's now lined up with a hole so that the switch will engage with that. Then we've just pushed in the kickstart spring, and I'd normally then fit the kickstart lever, but we haven't got it yet, it's on its way. So I've just put a pair of moles in, because what you need to do is tension the spring so that the gear lever always, comes back up. So basically I've just put a pair of moles on, so you just turn it to about a full turn. And so when we put that in, then the gear lever will always be the kickstart lever will always be sprung back up to the top. Okay, I'm just going to release that tension for now, because obviously what I need to do first is well seal everything, put a bit of oil here and there. I'm not worried too much, because when we get the neutral switch in, we can fill the whole gearbox full of oil, and it'll spread nicely. But there's a few places like on this bush and so on, and on here, where the oil is going to be difficult. It's going to take time to spread to, so we need to make sure that they're properly oiled. Okay, and then we'll get the cover on. Okay, I'm just putting the gasket on. There we go. And then importantly, this little O-ring, I think this is the last one, that goes on the sort of the tunnel for the gearbox, the gear change shaft that goes across the engine. So don't forget that little O-ring seal there. Okay, we've got weld seal on there. Oh dear, and the first thing that happens is that the moles come off. There we go. Put them back on. Let's see if we can wind up the spring. There we go. And get this on the studs. And all being well, that's why, because it wasn't in the right place, this pull. It was caught on something but not in the right place, the kickstart spring. There we go. All on. Take this off now. There we go. Right, last thing on the gearbox then, for now is fitting the neutral indicator switch. So I've got my circuit tester set up, and when the switch is depressed, get the bleep. So I know that the gearbox is in first, so when I screw this in with these connected, then when it bleeps, then I know that's that's where the switch wants to be. The problem with these switches is you can screw them in too far, and then the switch interferes with that cam plate. It can actually be it can be too tight on the cam plate and really stop gear changes, especially between first and second, because this is jammed on the little protuberance on the cam plate. So you just have to get it screwed in just far enough that it just works without screwing it in too far. Oh, and yeah, just to make matters complicated, because the switch is a bodge. It's added later on to an ordinary gearbox. So there's the boss, which was screwed in already. Then this goes in first, and it's actually this that touches the cam plate, and that goes on top of the switch. So you have to put this up first, and then screw this in afterwards, just to make life really complicated. Right, and there we go. I've screwed the switch in. A little washer. I've also put some thread lock on it, again to try and stop them leaking, because these are prone to leak, these little damn things. And I've screwed it in just far enough so that in neutral we have contact. There you go. So we know that when that lug comes round, neutral switch is going to work. Only just screwed in just far enough to fire the switch. Don't want it any tighter than that, because that'll interfere with the gear change. If I can get that there we go. And all that remains now is we're going to pour some oil in the gearbox. Yeah, that's great. And then that's our first sort of part of the engine kind of finished, really. Well, first outer cover on. I know it's a bit dull again now because I've got oil and rubbish on it, but a quick bit of Solvol. When I've finished, I'll polish it all back up and it will come up like a mirror again. Very pleased. Right, oil. Well, I've just got standard oil, standard gear oil. I mean, there's all sorts of fancy gear oils you can put in. To be honest, I just use standard gear oil. If the gearbox is right, it'll work. And if the gearbox isn't right, then no matter what fancy oil you put in it, it's not going to work. That's what my opinion. So I just use a decent standard oil, and I think that's fine. Anyway, I'm going to pour some oil in the gearbox. Okay, so there's been a bit of a nightmare for reasons that I still don't quite understand. I put the neutral indicator switch in, thought everything was okay, put the outer cover on, filled it all full of oil. Then I checked the gears, and I discovered that I checked the neutral indicator switch to discover that for some reason it was just jammed on. So it just was giving out a signal no matter what gear you were in. Now, exactly what had happened, I don't know. Somehow there's that little pin that sits on top of the switch, and I think that jammed actually in the little mounting boss that it goes into. Anyway, so of course it was already full of oil by then, so I had to drain all the oil, take the switch back out. In the process of taking the switch out and messing about with it, the wires snapped off, which is well known, but I didn't want to buy a new one because the replacement switches, I've had them leak oil before. They work, but they actually leak oil through the switch. So then I had to solder new wires on and get it all back. Actually got it, tested it all, got it all working again. After taking all this case off and everything, put all the case back on, everything's fine. And then I thought, hang on, suddenly I lost all. I knew something wasn't right. Something wasn't right. I couldn't work out what it was. I now had a working neutral switch, to some extent. But suddenly the gearbox didn't feel right suddenly. And then I tested it and I realised that I'd lost all the free play in the end of the lay shaft. As you can see, I've got it back now, thank heavens. And I couldn't work out what it was. But then I had an idea, and I had to take all this off. I had to completely strip all the gears back out of the gearbox. And what had happened was, when I'd taken this cover back off to mend this switch, it had actually pulled the lay shaft off a bit with the cover, and in so doing it unseated that thrust washer at the far end of the gearbox that sits around the needle roller bearing. And so there's a little pin there's a hole in the thrust washer, and there's a pin that it sits on, and the thrust washer had come off, turned, and was sitting on top of the pin rather than the pin going through the hole in the thrust washer. So that had taken up all the play in the lay shaft, and and I could have missed it. I could have missed it, to be honest, and the whole thing would have rocked solid. Anyway, so I've done it, back on. Now all the gears are working. We know we've got play. Now hopefully, hopefully we now have a working neutral switch as well. I've connected it up to my circuit tester, and hopefully when I put this into neutral, it's in first at the moment, so that's right at the top of the quadrant, right at the top. So moving it down one with my gear lever, otherwise known as a screwdriver, hopefully we'll get a beep. Oh, God, I bloody hope we do anyway, when we go into neutral. Oh, there you go. So hopefully that's done. Of course, I've also had to take the main shaft, the nut back off the end of the main shaft to get the inner cover back on. Now I've got to go through all the palaver of putting it back on again. Anyway, but you learn from these things. You do. Like taking the gearbox back apart and putting it back together. I can now do it in about like 30 seconds, literally, and I know exactly, and I can feel everything. I know it. So you do have to look at these sort of events like opportunities a bit. You do get to understand the whole thing a lot more, and your knowledge does grow. So don't look at them as setbacks. Look at them as opportunities, learning opportunities. That's what they are. As an ex-teacher, I can tell you that. Say to your students, no, that's fine. It's a learning opportunity. It's not a mistake. Right. Let's see if I can get this tightened back up, and then we're about in business, except I'm just going to take the camera off here if I can without turning it off and messing everything about. Probably turn itself off. What I'm actually doing is, I'm actually, having checked everything again, I'm going to get this plate here. It was very rusty and I thought we'd get away with it, but having double checked it now, I've taken it back off again. I really don't like the action. These pulls, these dogs, spring-loaded dogs, that they, when you turn the gear lever, they go underneath the plate, and they're not going smoothly. So I'm going to order a new plate to see if I can get those running. They graunch a bit. They're not smooth, and I think it's because this plate is rusted. So I'm going to replace this plate, which I think I should have done first time around. So like every cloud has a silver lining. If that hadn't gone wrong, I'd have left this plate in there and the gear change would have been okay, but I'm sure it's going to be smoother with a new plate. There you go. Yes, and indeed another bonus about having to do it again is I tried a new way of locking this locking the engine, so I could do up the kickstart nut on the other end of the main shaft. And I bought this little locking tool, and I've never tried this before, and it worked like a charm. Just for those of you who've ever read the manual, when I very first did this, I just wrapped the chain around this area, and because someone had done the whole thing up with really, really strong Loctite, the chain actually dug in here and actually cracked this mounting where the pressure release valve goes in. But with this tool, spreads the load a bit, and it worked a charm. So you learn something new every day. And of course, if I hadn't know how to do this, then I wouldn't know how to do that. Yeah, so where did I get it? I just got this on the internet. Man, is it Motion Pro sprocket jammer. I use it generally on the rear chain, you know, that goes in the chain and that goes in the sprocket, and but it's good I can use it on here as well, and that worked really well. So there you go. It's another plus about having to rebuild the whole gearbox again. I found a new and much easier way of locking that sprocket. Don't really like locking it on the on the casing, but as long as the load spread, and that's not a massive torque. It's 45 pounds this nut, so I was happy about doing that. But there you go. That's another plus about getting things wrong or having problems, because you know, good things can come out of it.